Coming off of what I thought was a weaker entry last week, this week's episode of The Bad Batch had some of what I think is the best character work that The Bad Batch has done. I've seen some criticism that not much actually ended up happening in the episode, but I think everything we got was very important in understanding how different characters felt about their positions. And I think this is all crucial context to have, especially as we approach the end of the show. Overall, I think there was a uniting theme of the characters all having the same interests, but differing ideas on what that should mean, and of what it actually takes to accomplish their goals. Specifically in this episode, the interest we're talking about is protecting Omega, whether from the Empire or other threats. And this is something that she, of course, has in her own best interests, but it's something that the Bad Batch, the rest of them, both as a group and individually, want to look out for, and by the end of the episode, it's even something that Ventress is concerned for as well. But over the course of the episode, we have the Bad Batch being wary about working with Ventress once they learn who she is, especially, and we have something that Ventress brings up, which has been kind of an underlying theme throughout the show's run. That eventually Omega needs to grow beyond what the Bad Batch is able to provide for her, despite their need to protect her. We've kind of seen Hunter acknowledge the flip side of this before, where early on in the first season of the show, he was trying to leave her behind with the Lacanes, thinking that where they were going would be too dangerous, and she'd just be safer having a hopefully normal life. But more and more we've seen the Bad Batch have to come to terms with the fact that Omega is capable in her own right, and now with her being one of the galaxy's most wanted, their ability to protect her is going to be limited as well. The title of the episode is Harbinger, and through this and so many other things, the show really is trying to point us towards what is coming. Omega, often against the wishes of Hunter and the rest of the Bad Batch, has been taking a more proactive role in planning her own protection and other operations that the Bad Batch have been a part of. Crosshair wouldn't be with the group if it weren't for Omega's actions. And on that front, this is, I think, the first episode where we really see Crosshair as an integrated member of the group, which I think is helped by the fact that they're all together, and Ventress is this outside force that the Bad Batch has to reckon against. We had a bit of that in the earlier episodes with Echo, but because of the revelation that Crosshair was potentially part of the training program that made the CX troopers, there was an underlying feeling of mistrust, especially with the other clones, and Crosshair still had a lot to overcome. Everything obviously isn't just going to be fixed already, but they really are united in their goal of protecting Omega. And I don't think Hunter or Wrecker have any doubts on Crosshair's intentions in that category at least. But Omega has been starting to chafe a bit under this situation, and I think it's pointing towards an end of the show where Omega is no longer going to be with the members of the Bad Batch. The big question is, of course, why exactly the Empire is after her and what that means for her. But I think we did learn a few things with respect to the possibility that Omega might be Force sensitive. Now, the tests earlier on in the season obviously don't directly mean that Omega must be Force sensitive. The core of what we know is that Hemlock was testing the ability to add midichlorians to blood, and while this caused the samples from other clones to degrade, it didn't happen with Omega. What we don't know is what that exactly means about Omega's blood. It doesn't directly mean that Omega must be Force sensitive, but we don't know what the mechanism that would stop this degrading from happening might be. One of the possibilities would be that having a higher concentration of midichlorians is what allows other midichlorian-rich blood to be added. We don't even know if the Empire knows what they're specifically looking at in this situation either, and I think that's backed up by the fact that they need to study Omega's blood more to figure out what exactly is going on. That's why they want her in the first place. But I think the specific choices made in highlighting what it means to be Force sensitive and how you might notice that point more towards the direction that Omega is Force sensitive than not. And from the Empire's side, if they're trying to find out how they can do experiments with the Force related to clones, then finding out that a clone was able to be Force sensitive out of the gate would be something they're interested in. I do have to question Ventress's methodology for testing Omega's M count, because it seemed like it was mostly just half-hearted attempts to train her that didn't go very well. But I think the last lesson/test, whichever you want to call it, is something we should pay the most attention to, and I think it's something Ventress paid attention to as well. This is the test where Ventress was out on the water with Omega and was talking about using the Force or your connection to the Force to kind of draw in other living beings. Specifically, she says this:
"Many who wield the Force have an affinity for nature. They connect with things that respond to their energy."
Well, on the one hand, it was nice to see Ventress, who we have so much experience with as just being this angry Sith assassin, take a different approach to the Force and talk about these other elements for it, really highlighting part of her redemption. I think her taking this approach towards Omega had more to do with what she saw in Omega. We've been able to see now for 3 seasons how Omega makes these connections with other beings, whether they be animals or other people. And I think this is ultimately what makes Ventress come to the conclusion that Omega might be Force sensitive. She tells Omega that she is not Force sensitive, but then Hunter and Wrecker seem to think that she's lying, and I kind of agree with their assessment. From Ventress's perspective, I do think she wants to see Omega be protected, and Omega learning how to use the Force is something that might make her more of a target. More importantly, Ventress calls out the rest of the Bad Batch as kind of holding Omega back, and I think she sees this empathy that Omega has as a reason that Omega might not want to leave the Bad Batch, and therefore would never really get anywhere in her Force training anyways. I also think this being a potential approach to the Force for Omega makes a great contrast with what we're seeing from the Empire. The show is focusing on what the Empire is doing, especially under Hemlock's experiments, as being this kind of perversion of the Force. The Force is supposed to be a connection between all life, but we're seeing Palpatine and Hemlock try to study that and figure out how they can just use it for their own gains, no matter how much it damages the other life around them. Omega, on the other hand, has been almost the embodiment of that connection. So do I think it's conclusive that Omega is definitely Force sensitive? No. But I think it thematically works, and I think it's what the show is pointing towards. It may also be pointing towards what the future of Star Wars animation is, but we'll get there in a second. The other topic is, of course, Asajj Ventress herself. The biggest question is, of course, how is Ventress still alive? And Jennifer Corbett has actually said we are going to get that story in other media. There were some other allusions towards the events of Dark Disciple in the episode. I think her skin has the marks from the Force lightning that hit her and killed her, and she also references still having some lives left. But for those of you who may not have read Dark Disciple, I actually don't think that her coming back to life in that situation is a retcon of the book. My reading of the book, which keep in mind was based off of unproduced Clone Wars episode scripts, was that even if they didn't 100% intend to bring Ventress back after the point, they wrote her death in such a way that they wanted to leave that door open. So what happens is Ventress dies to Count Dooku's Force lightning when she jumps in front of it to save Quinlan Vos. Quinlan and Obi-Wan take her body back to Dathomir, where they submerge her in the Waters of Life, and the Waters of Life start glowing green as they're leaving. To me, it felt a lot more symbolic of a rebirth than the fridging that it would have been otherwise, as she died to save Quinlan. You can have whatever opinion you have about whether characters should or shouldn't be able to be brought back from the dead. It is something that the Clone Wars, which again is the source material for that book, had already established for the Night Sisters with Darth Maul before. So at the very least, I wouldn't call this one just a retcon or ignoring the continuity of the book. That is, of course, just my opinion, though. While this is the last season of The Bad Batch, we do know there's going to be other animated shows in the Star Wars universe using the same style, based on what Dave Filoni said about Tales of the Jedi Season 2 being used to train up more people to work on this type of show. So I think there's a very reasonable shot that what they're setting up with this is Ventress taking on Omega's training. They talk so much about how if she is Force sensitive, then the Bad Batch isn't the environment she needs to be in, and if she leaves the Bad Batch at the end of the season, heading off with Ventress as someone who's more capable of protecting her from the kind of things the Empire is going to be sending after them makes a lot of sense. I don't think they're setting up that particular point of contention for nothing. All in all, I'm really excited to see where the season goes. This was one of my favorite episodes this season, just because I think it set up so much with all of the characters and really examines where they've been so far. Thank you for watching. We're going to have a full discussion about the episode tomorrow night with Eckhart's Ladder on Tapcaf Transmissions, live at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Hope to see some of you there.